We are recording.
Okay. Just to let everyone know, this is the community meeting that we're holding for the draft environmental impact statement. We're going to give people a few minutes to log on before we start. So probably start at like 3:32 or 3:33. Just a sec. Like we got it. Oh, we have quite a few more people. Okay, I'm going to start. My name is Ann Mueller. I'm a planner with the City of Covington, and thank you for those of you that have joined us today. I will introduce you to some of the people, the panelists here today. We have Lisa Greeter from Burke. She's one of the consultants on our team that the city has assembled to help us with evaluating our current code for the downtown area and ways that we can address improvements to it to get us to a higher quality development, more pedestrian oriented development, and also a wider variety of housing choices. There's also Jenna Estep, who's our community development director here, who will be helping out answering questions. And there's also Ryan Harriman. Did I pronounce that right, Ryan? Okay. And also not showing is also Daphne, another planner here, who will be helping me as well. So again, we're here today to introduce everyone to the Downtown Form-Based Code and SEPA Infill Exemption Programmatic Draft Environmental Impact Statement that the city issued yesterday, March 3rd, 2021. We are now in a 30-day public review period, and we welcome public comments on this draft document, and we'll do so until April 2nd. And we'll go into more detail about doing that if you haven't participated before in reviewing or commenting on an environmental draft impact statements. That isn't to say that there won't be other opportunities down the line for public input on actual code drafting, but we'll have some additional hearings later on, and we'll show you a schedule. I want to do a couple of quick housekeeping notes. These online meetings are getting to be more normal for us, and we hope we've gotten a lot of our bumps worked out. But as we go forward, please be patient if we run into any technical blips with sharing of screens or accidentally muting ourselves, or something happens. So please be patient with us. One of the features we discovered last time, the Q&A, we have a Q&A feature in Zoom that the public can submit questions with, and staff may be able to address your concern right there. Then if we don't do it type of response, that doesn't mean we don't see it. It means that we know the question will be answered a little shortly in the presentation, or we want to talk about it at the very end. It is possible we may be trying to beta test where everyone can see that. So it's possible you actually will see our typing live, and excuse our typos, but that's something we're beta testing, and we're not sure if it will show up or not. So that's one thing. If you need to leave before the end of the presentation, we just want to let you know that we are currently recording this, and we will post it to our project webpage that I'm going to show you in a minute. So you can come back and look at it or share it with a colleague or a neighbor, if they are interested in looking at that. It might take us a couple of days to get it up. They're big files and they take time to process. So I do encourage everyone to visit our project webpage if you haven't already found it. And I believe I'm sharing it right now. I'm going to go back and show anyone who's here and hasn't visited this website we've set up for this project. Here's the city's homepage. If you go here, a quick way to get to it is, I thought I had that too. Sorry, something popped up. There's over the popular links on the left side, there's a Forming Downtown's Futures. This is one way to get here. You can click on that. It takes you to a web page that we've set up. We post as public opportunities for comments appear. We post information here as well as background information. So you'll see we talked about today's meeting and the link to how to get to the section where the draft environmental impact is saved. There's also a little sub menu that talks about the downtown timeline since incorporation and some of the highlights we picked out. Just some information about what a form-based code is. Initial findings, we have a bunch of information. You can go back and see past stakeholder interviews, existing condition reports, and open house summary. There's also this public review process, which is where we are now. If you click on that, it should take you down. And here's a prior recording to the past meeting we had. And then we're right here in the draft environmental impact statement. And you can see the notice availability and a link to the draft EIS is posted there. So this is just to give you an orientation. We will keep this up to date. And Lisa will show you that we have some, definitely some upcoming meetings that we'll be scheduling to put on here and let you know. There's also, sorry, one more thing before I pass it over. If you want to receive a courtesy notice or any updates, we do have a sign up list here. Sign up for email updates. And some of you may have received notification of this way if you don't actually aren't an agency of jurisdiction or live in the downtown. This is a good way to make sure you hear from us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Greeter to walk through things for us. Thank you. And Lisa, do I need to stop sharing?
No, it's letting me take over, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes. Perfect.
So thank you, Anne. I think you covered a lot of what's on this page here with the website, that the meeting's being recorded, but I think also we have Anne's email here, which is also on the website. And eventually if you submit comments on the EIS, Anne will be the one receiving those. So just to give an overview, I think Anne gave a good sense of it as she was walking through the website, but just to summarize, this is a process whereby the city is taking stock of the last few years of implementing its current downtown plan and wanting to understand what kind of changes to regulations the city may want to make to improve design, and to make sure that the streets and public spaces are working well to meet a pedestrian-oriented mixed-use environment. And so the outcome of the review is a new form-based code that is meant to help respond to recent changes in the regional economy and advance the city's vision and act as a catalyst for construction. The city is also thinking about adopting a SEPA infill exemption, which would facilitate permitting of mixed use and residential development. And all this work is being funded, or most of it is being funded through a grant received from the Department of Commerce. So for the rest of the slides, we'll go over information about the project in more detail. What's an EIS? What are some of the objectives and how those objectives tie to the alternatives that we are examining in the EIS, and then how to comment. And our study area is downtown, which is outlined in the dark black line here. And it's the same downtown boundary that the city looked at in 2010. So that's the starting point for our study area. For those who may not be completely familiar, the State Environmental Policy Act is one of the governing laws that we are using to develop this environmental impact statement and the associated infill exemption to facilitate development. SEPA started since the early 70s as a way to consider natural and built environment conditions before approving permits, or in this case, adopting regulations or policies. And an EIS is a document that is designed to provide that information, and it allows the city to consider some alternatives and to figure out what's the appropriate level of mitigation. An infill exemption is something, SEPA has a lot of ways in which it exempts development, but one of the ways it looks at it on an area-wide basis is an infill exemption. So you define the area and you provide the upfront environmental review. And in this case, the infill exemption is meant to bring more housing into urban centers. That's one of its areas of focus. So it is to facilitate residential and mixed-use development. But it does not apply when there are lands covered by water or wetlands. So some of the areas closest to Jenkins Creek, where the downtown edge is, may not be able to use this infill exemption, but the environmental review could still be useful for those developments, even if they don't use that exemption. But the vast majority of downtown would be able to use it. So where this would apply would be in the downtown zones. So the general commercial, mixed housing office, MHO, and town center. What would be exempt would be residential that's above any other exemption thresholds the city has, mixed use development, and then there's an allowance for some commercial development other than retail. So what that really means is something like office, for example. You could do a bit of office there and be exempt. And again, it can't happen if there's lands covered by water or if there's a rezone that needs its own review. And then the Department of Ecology has indicated if it's a kind of a use that would need a permit to have an emission to the air or water, it also would not be able to use this. Or if they're doing something within a critical area. It's really meant to say there's a whole body of regulations that the city already applies to development, and the SEPA review is not necessary in order for the city to properly condition a development. If it's a property that has a lot of critical areas or some other things going on, there just may need to be a closer review. And that's why there's some of these parameters around it. So that's the infill exemption. Just to compare, the city already has some exemption levels in its code. So developments of 9 or fewer single family homes, 60 or fewer in certain zones of multifamily would not need to undergo SEPA review. And then there's some small office or commercial that would not need it either. So what this would mean is any multifamily development above this level or in other zones, so like the TC zone, for example, any mixed use development, so any size of commercial or retail as long as it has housing with it. And then, you know, instead of going through the standard exemption of 12,000 square foot office, you could use the infill exemption to do a little bit more. So the document that's out on the web and showed you where the links were on the project website, it has 5 components, 5 chapters. There's a summary section, which might be a good place to start because it covers all the topic areas, and you can use that as a way to identify areas you want to spend more time on. There's a description of the alternatives, and I'll walk you through that so you can see what code or street or other changes might be proposed that you might be interested in that are examined. And then chapter 3 is the evaluation of the environment. And these are the topic areas on the right-hand side here: surface water, land use, aesthetics, transportation, utilities, and public services. And that includes fire, schools, parks, and police. And then the appendices do contain the code proposals that are under consideration. They are also linked at the city's website. And so for each of the topics, we cover what's the current condition. So today it's called the affected environment, the impacts, where we compare the alternatives, and then mitigation measures that could either be existing code or some other proposals that could mitigate the impact. And then despite mitigation, are there any residual impacts? So we started with the project objectives to help us define what the alternatives would be like for the environmental impact statement. So again, the major components we're looking at here are this form-based code. We call it a hybrid because it's mostly about design more than land use, but it still has some elements that cover land use and other things. So it's called a hybrid. And then we have some other codes proposed as we just walked through for the infill exemption. And then through the EIS, we wanted to know, were the proposals for infrastructure improvement that the city had planned still sufficient, or are there other things we need to do to make sure that, for example, transportation functions well? So we looked at a bunch of components for the alternatives. I'll walk through them and then we'll show you how they vary by alternative. There are some elements to amend the land use plan in the comprehensive plan, the zoning code, and in some cases the map could change. We have projected growth in the downtown and looked at that and evaluated that in the EIS. The form-based code, we'll walk through what are some of the components in that. There are a couple other code changes around tax exemptions that promote multifamily development. There are some proposals to advance civic investments, the Civic Plaza and other open space. And then circulation, the city's had a plan in place for a while to improve streets. There are some suggestions to enhance that through this process. And then we've already covered the infill exemption, but that is also a component of the proposal or the alternatives. So the future land use map changes are pretty narrow. Right now in the comprehensive plan, this pink area is called downtown, and then school sites or park sites are called out as public parks. So what we're suggesting is this larger green space here is where the Civic Campus is proposed, and it may have a mix of features on it. So certainly some open space and plaza, but there also could be other land uses there. So we would suggest it become downtown. And then on the other hand, there's been some property acquisitions for the proposed park, South Covington Park. And so that would get that green color where there's been some property acquisition. So pretty light touch on the land use plan page. This downtown boundary would largely stay as it is. For zoning, the no action alternative, which is today's plan, and then one of the alternatives would keep zoning as it is, which is general commercial in this dark red, and then the medium pink mixed commercial. The lighter pink is town center, and then the yellow areas are that mixed housing office. One of the alternatives, alternative 3, considers what's the best zoning for a couple of the subdivisions that are called MHO. So the EIS would test that change. And so in these two areas, they've had zoning in place since before incorporation that allowed for residential uses as well as small scale commercial. But we heard some early input about whether that, some folks wondering about whether those would change anytime soon from single family. And so one of the alternatives considers whether or not to change that zoning. We also took a look at growth. In the city's comp plan and traffic model, we had anticipated that between 2015 and 2035, around 800 dwelling units would happen in the downtown. Well, largely a lot of that has come in either constructed or there are proposals before the city in the permit process. There was also quite a bit of square footage planned for in the city's comp plan and transportation model. Taking a look at trends, we weren't seeing as much new commercial space. There's already a lot of commercial space downtown. We weren't seeing a huge trend towards that. So what we were suggesting was to look at decreasing the amount of future commercial space added and instead adding more residential into the mix. There's still a lot of commercial space that could be added, but adding another 1,200 under these action alternatives. So no action again is our current plan, the current city comp plan and zoning. And then these other alternatives are different variations on the current plan. So that's at the plan and zoning map level. So the other major change is to look at this hybrid form-based code. So whereas a conventional zoning code would focus more on the land uses and less on the design or form of development, the form-based code kind of flips that and has more about form. So there's a lot more consideration of the public realm, which would be the street and on-site recreation space, as well as the height and form of the building. There's more graphics and tables, and it's easier to make your way through the code to understand what's allowed and what's desired. There's more on the incentives to get to a higher quality design as well. So we're still going to keep the zones that we just described on that other map, but make that code work better. So this is an example of how some of the standards would be regulated by block frontages. So on this map, the color coding tells you what might be more of a retail oriented street. There's storefronts, streets, mixed use. And so this will give you some sense of what where your building needs to be located on a property, what would be the window treatments. And there's many other things, but they would be guided by the block frontages. The form-based code will also continue to look at uses, height, and parking. So there's more on circulation, including the city already had planned some mid-block connections, but we've taken a fresher look at that. And then site planning standards would be updated, as well as building design. And do you want to add anything here? I think you're muted, I'm sorry.
I don't have anything really. This is all, if you want to, it's evaluated in the actual document and then the appendix A, right? Is that what this one's in? So if people would like to look at that, and there's comments made in that draft, and remember it is a draft that we're evaluating the impacts and considering.
Right. Another part of the city code gives a tax break for either 8 or 12 years for multifamily development for downtown. And the city wanted to adjust some of the standards so that there was a little bit more either design quality or support for affordable housing. So for 8 and 12-year property tax exemptions, the city would want at least green building requirements for both. For the 12-year tax exemption, at least 20% of the units need to be affordable. So that's part of the state law. So that will stay in. The city wanted to have more mixed income development. So the maximum share of affordable would be 30%, or you could go up to 40% with supportive services. So if there was on-site job training or counseling or other services available to the residents. So it's tweaking some of the criteria for both the 8 and the 12-year tax exemption. Street types we talked about a little bit earlier. The city has in its code different street types to cross sections for improvements, for multimodal improvements. And so much of that is retained, but there are some changes to where and how some of those mid-block connections would happen, and what some of the street cross sections would look like. And then the city has been planning for some years for a civic campus. That's shown at top in this rendering on the right-hand side. It would have a big civic commons, and there would be civic uses, and nearby on other properties there could be mixed uses that would be interconnected. And then another concept that's explored in the EIS under one of the alternatives is still having public realm spaces, but a more urban mixed use environment. So both of those are compared in the EIS. So this is a summary of the alternatives, and you can find that in chapter 2 of the document. But again, no action is the current plan and code. Alternative 2 would update the future land use map. So the Civic Campus and the South Covington Park, there'd be a new form-based code. It would have the Civic Campus as the city has been anticipating for the last few years. There'd be the new street plan, the multifamily tax exemption, and the infill exemption code. Alternative 3 is the same, except that instead of the Civic Campus concept, at the former Covington school site, there would be more of a mixed use intensive urban format, still with open space and gathering space. And then those 2 single family subdivisions we were looking at earlier, there would be that potential residential zone change. So that the bullets on the left are summarizing all the detail in this chart. These are all the components that we are looking at in the EIS and comparing and contrasting.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up, and I think you mentioned it the first, but just for anyone who's not familiar with it, there was a large parcel that was the former Covington Elementary School that has moved to another location in Covington, and the city has bought a portion of that property, and then the other part is I think under a purchase and sale agreement with another developer. So that's an opportunity for the city where we have always, even beforehand, planned to do some sort of civic plaza or town center there, but we actually are a step closer to getting there. So we're sort of re-examining what could go in that area and how we want it to develop. And that's also why we're looking at the street types. We've always had the ability to go in as new streets were developed and connected, because we're trying to establish a grid pattern. But that we haven't had necessarily identified them until the development came in. That's what Jenna Estep, our community development director, would establish as development came in. So that's sort of where we're refining it as we see development starting to come in and things happening. So.
Thanks, Anne. So the EIS also looks at mitigation measures comparing the alternatives, and the city has a lot of strong codes to condition development. These are just some examples on the left-hand side. There is more listed in the EIS. So, but just for example, stormwater manual requirements, the transportation concurrency and impact fee, and the capital improvement program, utility plans, public service plans. The new form-based code is meant to also mitigate, for things like design and height, and also to help provide things like open space for new residents, having a plaza and other on-site open space requirements. There's also the multimodal street plan that's being refreshed. Based on the EIS and traffic modeling too, there's been a couple of locations, intersections that would need some improvement beyond the city's adopted capital plan. So at 256th and 180th, either having a roundabout or another northbound right turn lane. And then at another location, Covington Way and Southeast Wax Road, a dedicated right turn lane. So not huge differences from the city's long-standing capital improvement plans, but just some updates in a couple locations. As Anne mentioned, this is the very start of the comment period for the new document. That's why we wanted to have this community meeting early on to share the results and give you time to take a look at it and weigh in. And so the nice part about an area-wide EIS is you're looking at the whole area, and your insights and comments can help the city plan for future projects and address cumulative impacts. And so, just identify if you have any comments, any specific locations or your preferences for alternatives, or things that the city should be aware of in terms of the information in the document. So the project website again is you can go to the city's main page and find Forming Downtown's Future, but this is also the link here. And we're looking for comments by 5 p.m. on April 2nd, so 30 days from now. And this is Anne's contact information, which is in all the materials you've received, but best way to send in your comments would be by email. That would be preferred. So, Anne, do you want to talk about the project schedule? I've kind of circled where we are in terms of we're in the middle of the comment period, but there's still a number of meetings and things to go.
Yes, I can do that. So we will, right now, this particular focus of this is on sort of the impacts and the different things we could consider, and our elected officials will ultimately decide. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the range of things that could happen, and some of them may not happen, but we want to make sure we understand what we're looking at, and that's what the environmental impact statement is. So that will close on April 2nd, and then we will actually address any comments we get in that and relook at anything, and we'll issue eventually a final EIS. It may be depending on the number of comments, it could be April or May, and that's flexible based on what we find out. But at the same time, sort of the top of the line, we're looking at and working with our planning commission to sort of have them walk through the code and see, does it make sense? Is it clear? Sometimes a planner might make sense, and we want to make sure that it's friendly to the developer and public, that what the intent is clear there. And they'll be going through sort of section by section. It's broken into articles in the next few meetings. And we do have a March 18th meeting where they'll be looking at the first couple of articles. So those are things, those are not public hearings, but they are open to the public on a regularly scheduled planning commission meeting time. And Planning Commission loves to have the public participate and share their thoughts, and we'll be walking through it to help refine it. And then once that's done, we'll come back with another version of the document, more for the public hearing portion of it, and that'll be later on. Our goal is to have this done by the end of June. We have some flexibility to push it out, but we're trying to move forward, keep the momentum going. And I just encourage everyone to pay attention to the page. If you do provide comment to us, formal comment, you do become on our list of official notifications. We have done our best to really try to reach out to the community as best we can. Notices in the newspaper, mailings to property owners, and posting on our web pages and here. So I'm looking at the notes up here. Let's see. Again, we're going to be recording this. If someone wasn't able to make it, we do know this is during the day. Our planning commission meetings are in the evening. So hopefully we'll get a different group of people that can participate. We do have a hard copy. It's a little hard now. City Hall is closed, but we are going to be putting out a hard copy of the draft environmental impact statement with the appendices outside the city door between 9 and noon every day when City Hall's open, and they'll be brought in. But if someone really wanted to read a hard copy, I know I like to do that. That's a good opportunity. And I think that's it. I don't know, Jenna, do you have anything that you or Brian, but no one has talked to this. This is a very quiet group of people. If you'd like to.
Sorry, Anne, no, I think you guys did a great job covering it. I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat option, but anybody out there, feel free to use that chat option. Otherwise, nothing specific from me, Anne. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand, or again, you can also, there's formal comments that in the directions that you ask that you sort of let me know that that's an official comment. But if you do have questions, I can definitely try to have, oh, so excited. So let's see. Okay, one of our planning commissioners is just sharing that there's a planning commission meeting tonight. It is not about the downtown code revisions, but it's going to be talking about tree code revisions. So thank you. That's our chair there, Commissioner Ingram.
And it's March 18th that you have the first 2 chapters of the code.
Yeah.
So the planning commission is going to look at it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah. So yeah. So again, like I said, if you have a question, please email me. And if it's, I know a lot of times people have just curiosity, what's going on, we can try to, I know Ryan has helped out a lot answering questions about people who live down there and what that means. We're happy to explain what that means, what we're doing. So, and I don't see anyone else. I guess we can close this now. I appreciate everyone attending. We have a, again, we'll be posting this online if you want to share it with any.
Like we have one in.
There's a hand raised. Ryan, do you know how to let them?
I just allowed to unmute. So are you, if you unmute?
Oh, here I will.
There, does that work?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you introduce yourself? Just, you know who this is?
Well, actually, I'm calling for my brother. He doesn't have,
Oh.
he's disabled and he doesn't have a computer. So
Oh.
my question is he's a little concerned and wondering, are you zoning all this? Or is the residential areas, is he gonna lose his house and he have to move? And
No, in fact, there are a lot of areas in our downtown. So there's 4 zones in our downtown. If there's an existing single family house or even an existing single family lot that's not developed, you can continue to have your single family home there. So no, we're not rezoning anything. We just wanted to acknowledge that in specifically 2 areas, there's several subdivisions that have historically, since when you were in King County, this area was considered an activity center, sort of identified as a potential area for commercial uses mixed with housing. So there's no zone, no rezone. If is he in Covington Firs, or they can continue to have their house, they can rebuild their house, they can sell it in the future. Person can either have a house there, and then there's some flexibility to have some types of office type uses or multifamily.
okay. He was just scared that he was gonna have to move. And I said, I don't think they're doing that. So
Yeah.
okay.
One thing is just think about, there's a little more flexibility with what they can do versus a different part of this, a single family in another part of the city can do home occupations, and this gives a little bit more flexibility of commercial uses. And in 2 of our MHO, it sounds like you can't see our screen right now, but if you can, those 2 in particular, in order for there to be any sort of like larger scale multifamily development or office type use, currently it requires the aggregation of a certain size of lots. So you couldn't just go in and put in a large apartment building. You would have to accumulate, and it comes out to about 9 or 10 lots. And there's special setbacks from any kind of existing single family use to protect that and create a transition. So, and I think one thing to consider is that we're looking out 20 years. So it obviously hasn't happened with development there, and it might not happen for 15 or 20 years, and it may even be further, but it's sort of an opportunity to make sure we maintain future development of multifamily and commercial space as we get more development in our town center, which we're really hoping will be a active, pedestrian oriented sort of active center for people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, so I have another question. It says from, I think this is our fire marshal, Larry Rabel. He just wanted to know if the presentation will be available online, and we can do both the recording, and I think Lisa can give me the, if I don't already have it, the PowerPoint, and we will upload the PowerPoint as well. So. Anyone else? I think those are our 2 questions. All right. Last chance, anyone, if you want to ask a question, we would love to hear it. Okay. Well, again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to get some comments back or see you on the 18th if you want to hear more about this. Thank you. Bye.